For most people, it's just a workout. For us, it's bigger than fitness. Welcome to the Bigger Than Fitness podcast. For those who strive to make themselves better consistently through health and fitness. I'm your host, Coach Marty. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends to help support this channel. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, Coach Marty here, bringing you another episode. We brought Ken back for another episode to chat about some general physical preparedness. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So say hello, Ken.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be back for another one. You see, I got an updated camera. So if you're watching, hopefully you can see a little bit more Christmas this time.
Getting more professional.
Yeah, figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of touch base on this because if you guys don't know this already, when you guys do CrossFit in a CrossFit gym or elsewhere, typically we're going to be following, it's called GPP or General Physical Preparedness. So we kind of want to go into what that means and what it means for you in terms of your goals and how it's going to get you more fit. So Ken, I don't know if you want to just kind of jump in and talk a little bit about the general idea of GPP.
Yeah, so GPP, the general definition, right, stands for General Physical Preparedness. And just a brief looking at CrossFit.com and kind of looking at their articles they've written over the years, they had a really good article talking about what is GPP and why you should do it, why you need it. And one of the things they said that really resonated with what GPP is and with me was they wrote a little blurb saying how prepared you are to tackle any physical situation that you might encounter. Do you have the strength to climb out of a ditch, or can you outrun some potential attacker? Can you scale your way out of a basement carrying a basket of laundry? And while some of those may be somewhat extreme, you want to be prepared for those situations. And that's what the general goal of GPP is. And that's why we do it at CrossFit.
Yeah, so, CrossFit was founded by Greg Glassman, and if you've ever heard him talk, he's very knowledgeable, and you could just tell by the way he speaks. He always kind of debunked the way fitness was defined years ago before CrossFit started. And actually, if you look in the dictionary, a definition of fitness is to be fit. So it's kind of like a circular definition. So he kind of redefined that. With GPP, it kind of solves what being fit actually is. So it's always hard to define CrossFit, but one of the ways they talk about is high intensity functional movement that's constantly varied. And so, yeah, if we want to kind of dive into that, obviously with our programming, a lot of people ask why we program the way we program. And a lot of people don't realize that they kind of look at it on a micro scale a lot. Like you look at one day and you only see 3 total exercises. And they're wondering well, that's all we're doing today. But what they're not looking at is the full week and the full month and how everything's kind of combined together. So where do you think that benefits people, overall when they're following consistent CrossFit program?
I think one of the things with GPP and how it can benefit people, if you're following a general program, you're going to get general exposure to training of the 10 physical skills that CrossFit likes to preach, right? Your endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, accuracy, agility, balance, all those things we're exposing you to with GPP. If you're doing, specific programming and you're only working, say, in strength and power, you're a lifter and you only want to be strong and you only want to have power, that's great. But, say years down the line, or even this could be your case today, you could be really, really strong, have an awesome deadlift, but, maybe you have to park a couple miles away from a venue and you have to walk over there. How hard is that going to be for you? You're going to show up, pool of sweat because you're working real hard. You may be a really strong power lifter, but you may not have the endurance or the stamina to walk that long distance. And so GPP is really good at balancing you out and being just exactly as that phrase is, generally prepared to do anything. And I think that's really where we benefit. You may look at something and say, well, we're only doing one movement. Like you were saying, we're only going to do 70 pull-ups or something. And you're like, well, that's a lot. And when would I ever need that? Well, that's stamina testing. It's coordination testing. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think every week at CRC, when I look at the programming on a weekly view, you see that. It's true. You see your heavy day. You see, your engine day, your cardio Tuesday day. You see, your skills on a Friday. You see that stuff all show up on a regular basis, week by week. And if you keep doing it week by week and you stay consistent, you do grow in those 10 general skills. You do become balanced and you are generally physically prepared for anything.
Yeah. course. Some of the things that CrossFit talks about when they're teaching CrossFit and like their level ones is typical ways of training. The kind of the common way of training prior to CrossFit or even outside of CrossFit is very segmented stuff. So it's either like, you know, someone's training for a marathon and all they do is run, and they're going to get really, really good at running, but they're going to lack in all the other areas, especially the opposite end, which would be lifting.
Right.
And then vice versa, you get all your power lifters and Olympic lifters only train those modalities. They're going to get get super good at those, but then they're going to lack in the other areas. And so what CrossFit does is it kind of takes every physical challenge, right? Whether that's a long run, a swim, a bike, with your heavy lifts or anything kind of in between, and mixing them all together in many different ways, shapes, and forms, as well as time domains, right? So we have long workouts, medium workouts, and short workouts. So what ends up happening, I don't know if you've kind of think about like a typical very good marathon runner, right? They're kind of skin and bones type of body type, where they're very skinny. There's not a whole lot of muscle mass on them, but that's from that style of training. And then you look at a lot of power lifters, and they don't necessarily have the best physique most of the time, but they're super strong. But if you look at like a very good CrossFitter, someone that trains CrossFit regularly and takes care of their nutrition, like they kind of have that ideal body type, which a lot of people are looking for, which is decent amount of muscle mass, but it's like functional muscle mass, and they're very lean. And that's what you get with that style of training, is that high intensity, mixing in the heavy, mixing in the long, and everything in between. So I think that's a really good thing to understand when you're doing CrossFit, is like, even though we're not training something specific all the time, you're really kind of, your goal is to get good at like everything. So you might not be best at one thing, but you're generally trying to level the playing field across all those different challenges, whether that's strength or endurance or anything in between. So what would you say to someone that feels like, you know, they may have like a specific weakness in their training, but they may not feel like they're gaining much progress in that specific area when they're following CrossFit's general programming? Right.
Yeah. And I think I suffered from this over the years. And I actually reached out to you at one point saying, you know, I came into CRC as a soccer player and I had a pretty good engine coming in the door, but, you know, I never strength trained, and strength was and continues to be one of my weaker physical skills. And so, you know, I went to you as my coach and said, oh, Marty, how do I get stronger? What do I have to do? That is one of my weaker skills. And you did provide some supplemental guidance and programming for things you can do to, for me, improve my weaknesses and work on them. But, you know, if you're just coming in doing general physical preparedness every day, yeah, you're going to be exposed to your weakness, but it's not necessarily going to dramatically improve your area in that weakness, because you do have to work on that on the side. There is an accessory piece, you know, in my case, strength, but some people gymnastics or their engine, specific skill work, you know, for Olympic lifters even, you know, speed, flexibility, that type of thing. And so, you know, just showing up expecting doing the general physical preparedness is going to dramatically improve your weaknesses. That's not exactly true. I mean, yeah, you're going to get a little better, but to make drastic changes, you got to do some supplemental specific training on the side. Sure.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, so for example, like it's gotten a little warmer out, right? So we started running more, especially when we were prepping for Murph. We've been doing some Murph prep, which is a little bit more running, obviously mixing in the pull-ups, push-ups, and squats. So you're probably going to get a little bit better at running just because we started running more than we were before, obviously, because of the weather. But if your goal is something specific around improving your running, there's a lot more to it than that. There's actually a lot of form and technique involved. There's specific training you should be doing on your own, interval stuff, tracking your splits on different interval workouts, understanding what your benchmarks are in those running categories, your 400 meter run, your 800 meter run, your mile run, your 5K, and then depending on what your goals are, you know, programming around those specific benchmarks so you can improve those benchmarks over the course of 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever you're working on. And it might benefit you to actually have a coach if that's your specific goal. Same thing goes along the opposite end. If you're trying to get better at Olympic weightlifting, if we're doing a specific weightlifting movement once every week max, maybe once every 2 weeks, yes, you're practicing it, but I don't think it's going to be enough practice to get that adaptation you're looking for to get better at those specific movements. So if your goal is to get really strong at Olympic weightlifting, you're going to have to do it several days per week. So there's something to be said, like, you know, after doing CrossFit for a little while, you'll probably figure out like the areas you need to work on most. And sometimes it could be a specific movement. We've talked about this in the past podcast about double unders and working that outside of the gym. And same thing goes along the lines of, you know, like I mentioned, running and Olympic weightlifting. And some of it is going to be like a training specific thing, like running, like Olympic weightlifting, but also Olympic weightlifting has a lot of coordination involved, a lot of skill involved. So there's definitely some practice involved with that too. So practicing a movement's going to help you get better almost instantly. Even one session could help you get better at the movement, but the training aspect and getting stronger and those kind of things is going to take several weeks, maybe even months to get stronger at the movement. and then you kind of combine those things, and that's how you're going to get better at specific movements. So with GPP, you mentioned those 10 areas of fitness, but you could also look at kind of the 3 main domains that we kind of go over in our training. And we have metabolic conditioning, we have strength, and we have gymnastics. And a lot of times there's people that are really good at strength. They lack in gymnastics. Maybe they lack a little bit in conditioning or any variable, something like that. A lot of times people aren't perfectly equal in those 3 things. So you can kind of start to address your weaknesses based off of those 3 categories and start working on those things outside of your typical GPP. Again, our typical program is 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. And those Thursdays and Sundays are our off days where we have open gym times. And those are perfect times to say, okay, I can come in and practice some things. I can come in, get some extra training in specifically on some of those weaknesses you might have, whether that's strength or cardio or whatever. And those are kind of the times to address your weaknesses a little bit more biased towards them. And that way you can kind of balance across those 10 areas of fitness. You can balance across those 3 domains with the strength, gymnastics, and metabolic conditioning. So those are just some ideas and thoughts when you're thinking, okay, I'm doing all this CrossFit, but I'm not getting better at running, or I'm doing all this CrossFit and I'm not getting better at Olympic weightlifting, or whatever the case is. If you have a specific goal that you're trying to work on, you're going to need to do a little bit extra work on those things outside of the general programming. So yeah, that's kind of GPP in a nutshell. We've talked about it. Again, it's to kind of raise the bar in all these categories. And, again, if you have specific goals outside of that, you need to work on them outside of that. I'm going to go back to the marathon example or half marathon or whatever you're training for. I'm a firm believer, and we've actually had people come in that used to do half marathons, whatever. And the way they used to train is all they would do was run. And a lot of times that actually leads to injury just because it's so much overuse. It's a lot of repetitions if you think about it. And so if they can supplement that with GPP and still be biased towards running and still get your 2 to 3 runs in per week, we've had members actually improve their times on those events and actually feel healthier going into the event because they're not overdoing it so much in the running category, because there is some crossover between the 2 things. So yeah, any additional points you want to touch?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple things. I want to kind of talk to and address to some of the people that aren't actively doing CrossFit or participating in GPP just at all. And they're just kind of listening to this and they're like, well, what are you guys talking about? And what's the benefit to doing this? And why should I even start doing this? And I think a lot of us, like I mentioned in the last episode, a lot of people come through the door at CRC or any CrossFit gym just because they want to be healthier. And GPP is certainly a vehicle and a gateway to do that. And I mentioned at the beginning, just kind of talking about the CrossFit.com article about, climbing out of a ditch and outrunning an attacker. Those are important things. And you do develop those skills, but also thinking of like an older senior that maybe falls in their home. Can they get back up? And that's some of, doing a burpee. I know that sounds maybe a bit over the top, but that is a true statement. If you can do a burpee, you can get up off the floor. And specifically, you're doing burpees when they're hard and you're tired and you're gassed. And that's a similar scenario you may be in as a senior if you fall. And I think there's benefit to doing GPP for living out those golden years. And I mentioned an example about, thinking of graduations coming up and people maybe having to park several blocks away and having to walk a long distance and do some endurance from the parking lot to the venue. Can you do that? How is that going to wipe you out? So I do think there's value in starting GPP, in particular with CrossFit, and why it's so much better in CrossFit compared to other choices. When you look at a popular boot camp, they do a lot of calisthenics work, and you're not getting that exposure to all of the 10 physical traits that CrossFit training and GPP offers. The bodybuilding and powerlifting, you already mentioned, they are neglecting some endurance work, and maybe they will struggle to walk those longer distances. And so there's a lot of value to being a well-balanced athlete, having that GPP. And I think there's value in, if you're not doing it, starting at number 1. But if you're looking at those golden years and you want to have that longer lifespan and be healthy and attend, graduations and weddings and dance on the dance floor, yeah, this is a vehicle for certainly doing that. Even looking at young kids, like my kids are, 11 and 9. There's value in them starting this now, developing those healthy habits. And, when I was young their age, I didn't do any of that. And I tend to think that if I would have done something GPP programming and CrossFit, my athletic career potentially could have been different, for better, for worse. But if you had been exposed to those things in an earlier life, how much better off could you have been? It's an investment in your health that only pays dividends the longer you invest in it. And so I do think there's value in starting if you haven't, whether you're old, young, whatever your goals are. Once you come in, your goals may change, but just walking in the door and starting GPP, starting at a CrossFit affiliate, you're going to find value in those health metrics changing and being able to live a longer, healthier life, or start a younger athletic career where you're able to maybe have a higher ceiling.
For sure. I wish I would have started CrossFit a long time ago.
No one ever says, I wish I never started. started this. You always wish you would have started sooner. That's for sure.
For sure.
Found it when you were younger. Everyone always says that.
I'm going to make one more point before we wrap this up, but to piggyback off what you were saying about being functional and maybe even an older person or whatever, I remember seeing this semi-viral video of, it must have been a grandma watching a grandkid that was in a stroller, and she is getting out of the car, and she thought she put the brake on the stroller with the baby in it, but she didn't, and this thing starts to roll down this hill or driveway. I can't remember where she was, but it's rolling directly towards a busy street with traffic just flying by, and she goes to try to run after it, and she trips and falls, tries to get up, falls again, tries to get up, falls again, and it was just so scary to see. And at the last second before the stroller goes out into oncoming traffic, this Good Samaritan runs by and stops the stroller. And so that's a perfect example. I mean, obviously that's an extreme situation and terrible circumstances, but you can only imagine certain things like that happening in other scenarios where you can't even take care of yourself, get up off the ground quickly enough when you're in an emergency situation. And that's pretty scary to think about. So, even as you get older, doing stuff, obviously we've talked about this before, but CrossFit's for anyone. You just have to put in the work, and you can scale. It doesn't matter what your age is. There is infinite scaling options for everyone. We've seen it hundreds of times in the gym, people of all fitness levels and ages. And the point is, it's just going to make you more functionally strong. So when you're in situations like that, you're prepared and you'll be able to handle some of those situations. So anyways, that'll wrap this one up. Thanks again, Ken. So if you guys are thinking about doing CrossFit, obviously come to Crooked River if you're in the Cleveland area and come talk to us and we'll take care of you. Doesn't matter your fitness level, because a lot of people think when you're starting CrossFit, you need to get in shape first. Well, you're not going to get in shape until you start CrossFit. So just come in, we'll modify, we'll take it easy. Your first few times, it's going to be hard, but we'll go at your level and we'll take care of you. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we will catch you guys in the next one.
Late.